What's up, guys, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Robbie Cassidy, and today we're going to discuss shoulder dislocations and then getting back to sport after a shoulder dislocation. The reason I want to cover this is because I have a lot of people who jump on board with me and they may have injured their shoulder recently within the last 3 to 4 months, or they could have done it 2 years previous, 3 years previous, but they never got the confidence to come back and play. So I want to, put this podcast out there so people who have a shoulder dislocation, it'll shed a bit of light on what you can do to get back to where you want to get to, and hopefully give you the confidence to start returning to the sports and the activities that you love to do. And this is the big thing that I really don't like to see. I hate to see people pulling back from sport because of an injury and fear of re-injury. Now, it's always going to be there, but there's a lot that you can do to build the body back up, build the mind back up, just as important, and prepare yourself to get back into a contact sport. So before I start, I want to just throw it out there that if anybody is looking to start a program, or if anyone is struggling with an injury, I usually say that the majority of people I take on are struggling with injuries or recurring injuries between 3 months, 10, 15, 20 years in some situations. And they are struggling to get back to a level that they want to, or they are feeling like they're training with the handbrake on all the time, or maybe they just don't have the confidence to get back into play. So these are the people that I work with mostly. And if anyone out there is listening to this, or you know someone who is in this position, definitely put them on to me, and we can chat about it in a bit more detail about what they can do. So to get it started and to kick it off, the first thing I want to touch on when I get into this is why shoulder dislocations in particular stop people from playing sport. Now, a shoulder dislocation is a fairly traumatic injury, and then there's a good few parts to it. And the fact that, first off, you have to go through a fairly, traumatic incident for it to happen. So there's a lot of force that can go through the shoulder, or sometimes it can just happen randomly, in that you just fall on an arm, fall on an outstretched hand, and you just, out of just pure being unlucky, as well as maybe you might be lacking a bit of strength there, it just pops out of place. Now, there's a few degrees that you can have a full shoulder dislocation where it comes out the front or the back. So front is an anterior dislocation. When it goes out the back, it's a posterior dislocation. And then you can have a subluxation. And a subluxation is a small bit more common. And that's when it just pops out and goes back in, or just slightly comes out of place. But it usually returns back to its normal position. And then afterwards, you can get a lot of pain with this. And it's something that I've struggled with as well myself in the past, is shoulder subluxations, where it just, if I was boxing, or if I was playing rugby, or if I was playing football, and I just fall on it awkwardly, or a lot of the time if I was boxing, how it happened to me was end of the fight where I was fatigued and I throw a punch, wayward one, and it just feels like the shoulder slips out and comes in. Now, my shoulders in particular, the mobility of my shoulders is fairly good, but at times it's probably a small bit too much, and I could probably say that one of my shoulders, my right one especially, it could probably fall in a degree of being hypermobile, I would say, because of the amount of subluxations it had. So I know the feeling when it pops out and pops back in. So much so that when I was younger, I could actually do it myself. I can't do it as much anymore, but I could kind of let it slip out and slip back into place. It was my little party trick. But aside from that, the reason I want to go into detail on that is because a lot of people may struggle with these, and I know I've had people in the new year jump on board who've had shoulder subluxations from being in the gym. And then others who've had it from just playing sports where they fell over and it popped in and out, and now they just have a bit of fear around that, and still a bit of pain, a bit of tightness in the shoulder as well, and a bit of weakness as a result of it. So I'll cover both sides of it. And going back into it, why do people stop playing sports? Well, really you look at like fear of re-injury is a huge one. The fear of it dislocating again and then being in the same position can stop a lot of people from trying to get back into the sport that they love. And that's completely understandable. The pain, the disability, and the fact that you're out for a couple of weeks to a couple of months after it can be much or enough of a deterrent to stop people playing altogether. Now, outside of that, I guess what happens after then is you start to lack confidence, especially if it's a repeated or recurring shoulder dislocation or subluxation, you'll start to lose confidence in your shoulder. And once you start to lose confidence, it gets difficult to get back into the swing of things because of the fact that it's more of a mental barrier than a physical barrier that's affecting you. And this is something that I see with people who I guess may have injured it when they were younger and it continued on for a couple of years after. Especially this happens commonly in I guess contact sports. But confidence is something that you have to work on outside of the physical. Okay, so you can't just look at the physical itself. You need to look at the mental and the psychological, I suppose, of why they are not confident to use it anymore and how that's affecting them on the day-to-day, as well as how it's affecting them when they look at their sport specifically. Then when we assess it or go into more detail on it, and this is especially when you're talking to people who have injured their shoulder, what you'll find is that a lot of them still have functional limitations in their shoulder as a result of the injury, or maybe they got surgery on it, or maybe they just never, I guess, fully went through their rehab, or their rehab could have been poor. Okay, so it comes from all aspects, and this is one then that I guess you really need to focus in on what they're limited at, what they need to work on, and then I guess build those up to the level that is acceptable. Now, when you're looking at what stops people getting back to sport, and you're looking at the poor rehab side of things, that's on both sides. That's on the practitioner side, and that's also on the person side. And a lot of the time, for a person to blame the practitioner only is I don't want to say a poor reflection of what happens, because there is times definitely that you might be with a practitioner who doesn't have a full understanding of what it's like to get back to the sport that you're trying to be in. But in a general sense, most of them are trying to get you back to a very good level, and most of them are interested in your success. So I think a lot of the time some of them get a bad rap for it, and I don't mean to give anyone a bad rap at all, for bad rep I should say, for it. But when you feel that you're not to the level you want to be at, it might be then at a stage that you need to change and work with somebody else. Okay, if you feel like, okay, I've gotten far enough with this person, I need to change now, and I'm just not confident getting back to sport yet, then it's probably time to look elsewhere to get that last percent in. Now, another issue is early return to sport, and this happens so commonly with sports people. They want to get back, you want to get back to playing, you want to start competing again. So you may skip a couple of steps in your rehab, or you return from doing rehab in the gym just as straight on the pitch or in the ring or whatever you're doing, and you don't take care of all the little things in between that, which in turn will cause a lot more issues. So you'll obviously, if you're not taking care of all the smaller things, you may feel like it's functionally okay and it's strong, but you've never put it through the position of, let's say, jumping up, catching a ball, and while there's someone else, let's say, either in front of you when you're landing, you have to get around, or there's somebody on your back trying to get the ball off you. It's a hard thing to replicate in the gym, and that's a graded exposure that's a situation that you need graded exposure to, and the only way of doing that is kind of jumping in and out of training, picking different situations that you're not confident in and building on them. But as I was saying, you need to take care of these, and then you need to make sure that your return to sport plan is proper. So I guess moving on from that, and to go into a small bit more detail, what are the biggest problems I see in rehab phase of shoulder dislocations? Are the biggest problems that I've seen with people who've jumped on board with me and who have had a shoulder dislocation and things that they lacked in their rehab before that. As I said there, the last point on what I touched on is the rehab programs don't go as far as they need to, in that they don't help you return to sport, and they don't take care of the confidence side of things. So you're not reintroducing sporting activities gradually, and you don't have a return to sport plan. So these are two huge issues that, if not taken care of, will cause problems down the road. So I would always say that we need to look at having a structured return to sport plan where you're monitoring the patient, or you're monitoring the client as well, and seeing how they get on. Because just getting someone to a level and saying, go back there and start training again, and then not following up to that, and not following up a couple of times, will leave them out on their own. And that once they get back to it, it's grand, okay, they get through the first couple of trainings, but when training starts to increase and they have to start taking more hits, and then you have to take into account the gym outside of that and all the other factors that are affecting their recovery, then you're going to have bigger issues. So you need that, I guess you need someone there to monitor it all the time to make sure that the person isn't getting overwhelmed, or that you aren't getting overwhelmed when you get back into your sport. Now, the other thing I see is that a lot of times they don't address your beliefs and your attitudes around the shoulder. And what I'll find is that a lot of people with a shoulder dislocation, there's certain positions that they just don't ever want to go into. So they avoid them completely in their rehab, and then they avoid them when they get back to sport. But it's like if you're playing a sport, it's like avoiding a certain part of your game and just not getting stronger on that in the hope that that never happens. So I think it's something that we do need to focus on a bit more, is addressing the limitations that they have and then the fears that they have around movement. And if you don't address those fears and you don't, I guess, incorporate them into the plan, that person will never get better in those positions. They'll never overcome those fears, and they'll always have different beliefs around what they can do and what they can't do with their shoulder, as well as they'll just avoid things completely because of a certain situation. So I would definitely watch out for that as well, and make sure that you address those when you do get into it. And I'm talking to the practitioner here, but I'm also talking to the patient as well and the client. If you're someone who still has fears around it and you don't know what to do about it, well, then it's worth reaching out for help and finding somebody who can, I guess, help you address those and help you work around those and work into them in a lot of situations and build on them. Now, outside of that, the other problems I see in rehab would be the shoulder is still weak when they get back to sport. There's poor mobility, they have a lot of functional limitations, they might have poor coordination in the shoulder, lacking a lot of strength, and at the same time they could have another condition, which is frozen shoulder, which happens to a lot of people after a dislocation, and that the shoulder actually locks up and they have lost a lot of range. And the issue I have with frozen shoulder, to go on a bit of a tangent here for a second, is that I've had people on board, and I had one lady on board recently who has struggled with frozen shoulder, and she was 25 years old, and she was a camogie player. But her consultant said to her that the only thing that she could do to improve that was to get surgery. That was the only option that she had. Which, when she said that to me, I couldn't believe it. I genuinely just thought that is the most uneducated opinion coming from a extremely educated person, to say that you only have one option. Now, maybe that's not what was said and that was what just was repeated to me, but I just thought it was crazy that there was only one option, is surgery. So let's say 400 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, as I always say, when the surgeon wasn't there in the first place and that person gets frozen shoulder, is that them done then? Are they finished? Was that shoulder just not going to work for them anymore? Is that their situation? That's just what they have to live out the rest of their life? Well, it's absolutely not, because the body is so adaptable and it's so strong that it will always look, and it looks for survival. That's what it is. It's a survival machine. So if it does have limitations, it will either look to work around them or it will work on them. And depending on what your mindset is, if you start to work on them, you can always improve them. You can always see small improvements, and in some situations it can be very big. In this particular situation, within 12 weeks we got her shoulder mobility basically back to normal with very little limitation. She doesn't have any real fears around it anymore. Her range of motion is near perfect. It's strong in all positions, and that's because she had the right mindset of, all right, I'm not going to go for surgery because there's no need for me to get surgery, because she had to get surgery and then do all the rehab after anyway. So we were just very aggressive with it, pushing on it all the time, making sure we were trying to improve on it and work on it. And in the end then, it was clear. It was perfect, and I was delighted. And I'm going to post it on Instagram soon enough, the actual before and after pictures of it, because it really annoyed me to see that the consultant was so against trying anything else apart from surgery. Now, I wonder why. That's the thing. I wonder what the idea was behind that. So we won't go into motives here, but I just was very pissed off about that when I heard it. Now, tangent over. The next thing is, I guess people move slowly through rehab, or too slowly through their rehab. They're not aggressive enough with their rehab. And if you're a sports person, if you're active, it doesn't matter what age you are, if you've trained for a good bit before this, you should be a bit more aggressive in your rehab. Taking it nice and slow and easy, in that grand will get you to a certain stage and a certain level, but that shoulder needs to be put to the ringer if you want it to be in the best condition possible. I'm not saying that you'll never dislocate it again. Okay, this is the thing, like once it's injured, what you do is you get it to the best condition possible, and you then hope that you have done enough so it's not in a compromised position, or that it doesn't dislocate again. But there's no guarantee that it's not going to. But what you can do is you can work on it so much so, and build up so much strength in so many positions that it's very unlikely that it happens again. And then you have coordination worked on, that you have stability worked on, that you have mobility worked on. Like, these are all the things that if you work on them, you can get back to what you want to do. But if you're moving too slowly through your rehab and you're mollycoddling it, which is a word I love, then you will find that it's going to take a lot longer to get back to where you want to get to. And because you're moving so slow, you can overlook some of the things that, or not overlook them, you might not lean into the things that need to be leaned into when they need to be leaned into. And what I mean is that, like, sometimes it might get sore, it might get very tight, you might have issues, and instead of working into those and building on it, they just avoid it for the time being. And because they're moving nice and slow, they don't pick up on that again, because they don't put it under that stress. So I think you need to be aggressive with your rehab at times as well. Now, how to get back to sport safely and effectively is the last part of this podcast. And I want to talk about basically what you need to do to return to sport, what way you should be when you get back there, and then I guess different things that you can focus on yourself. Now, when you're looking to return to sport after a shoulder dislocation, it's a fairly traumatic injury, as I said at the start, so you should be working with somebody who knows what they're doing. This podcast aims to give you better ideas of things that you can be working on and focusing on yourself, but it is important to work with a professional who knows what they're doing, because there's no point going in thinking you've everything ticked off, and then you get back to sport and you re-injure it again, and you have to start from stage one again. So, as I was saying at the start, you need a return to sport plan. You need a plan that touches on all the things that you're going to be going through, that covers all bases, and at the same time you can monitor your progress. Okay, you need to monitor your progress and your load, and you need somebody to look over it, because if you do, then you'll know when to pull and when to push on. And I think this is a big thing that's missed out in rehab, is that you're just given a load of exercises, go away and work on those, come back to me in 2 weeks. But you're not told what you have to do in between that. What about if you flare up in the first week? What do you do then? Do you just wait it out? Or do you actually push on and get a bit more done? Okay, so that's what you need a good understanding of, why you're doing things and what you can do to help it yourself as well. Okay, I would say you need to focus on coordination. It's a huge thing that's missed out when it comes to dislocations, because they have the basic exercises of like your circles on the wall where you're rolling a ball. They might have other ones where you're like catching and you're doing like you're throwing a ball off a wall and catching it. But what I mean is that you need to have low and high level stuff. So that's low level stuff, but you need high level coordination exercises where you're working on the specific activities in your sport or your whatever activity you're involved in. You're working on those in a graded exposure, I guess, way or situation. So you're not just throwing yourself in the deep end, that you're building it up over time. Okay, that's a huge part. So focusing on coordination, building strength, and working on mobility are huge. You should be addressing functional limitations every single week. You should be figuring out where you're still lacking in strength, where you're still lacking in mobility, and what actual activities or exercises are you still struggling with, and then lean in on those. So when you're starting to get back to sport, you shouldn't be shying away from anything, because there's so much chaos in a sporting situation that it's difficult to control everything. So it's better to just have everything covered. I would say you also need to assess the beliefs around your shoulder. Assess what you think of the shoulder. Assess how your body reacts to the shoulder. If you do that, then you can be in a good position to, I guess, build confidence, work on what's the word I'm looking for? Exposing your shoulder to uncommon positions. Work on building up your image of how strong you feel the shoulder is. Working on what you actually believe you can do and what you can't believe you can't do. And building all of those and getting rid of anything that's not needed. By doing that, you put yourself in a good position to improve on everything. So they're huge, okay? And I think that sport needs to be looked at specifically. And just doing exercises in the gym might not address those issues. So I would say increase your strength to the demands of the sport. And then when it comes to it, okay, you need to be aggressive with your rehab in the later stages, especially. Okay, grand if you take it slow all the way along. But if you're not aggressive at the end and you don't know what aggravates the shoulder and what the shoulder doesn't like, well, then it's going to be hard to get those last percent to really get to 100% and to make sure it's well able to handle anything that you put it under. So that's why I say be as aggressive as possible in your rehab at the later stages. And it will help you hugely when you get back to sport. It will help you massively with your confidence. And it'll put you in a position that you're very, very, very unlikely to re-injure that shoulder again. So guys, that's everything I'm going to talk about today on this podcast. I wanted to just talk a small bit about what people were missing out on in their rehab, or what I've noticed people miss out on. And I wanted to give you a better or different insight in what you can do yourself. But as I said, if you're struggling with a shoulder injury like this, reach out to somebody who can help. Okay? If anyone has any questions on anything I've talked about, send me a message on Instagram or send me an email at mobilitytutor@gmail.com. Because, as I said, you might feel like you're in a great position to go back, but there may be things that you need to still work on. And there may be things that you haven't thought of before. And getting a professional's advice goes a long way in improving that. So if anyone does need a hand with their shoulder, it does need a hand with improving it, just reach out, let me know what you're thinking, and if you want to, we can jump on a call and discuss it in more detail. And as I said, you don't have to commit to anything, so we can at least chat it out, see what position you're in, and make a plan from there going forward. If you know anybody who's struggling with shoulder dislocation or has had shoulder issues in the past, please just send them this podcast or send them on my name. Goes a long way in, I guess, promoting the podcast itself, but it'll also go a long way in helping people get back to the activities that they enjoy. Often, if I put out a podcast like this one, someone sends it to a teammate who may have stopped playing a year or two ago, and then we just work on getting back into that sport and getting back to play again. And there is a lot of, a lot of gratitude after that in terms of people love getting back to what they're doing. A lot of the time, people don't know what they fear. They don't understand why they're not going back to it. They just put it to, okay, my back is sore, my hip is sore, my shoulder is sore, and I just don't want to make it worse. That's a common attitude I hear. But it's, if you leave it now, it will only get worse as you get older. It's sorry to say it, but that's just the way the body works. If you don't use it, you'll lose it. So start working on things now that are a problem, and make sure you take care of them, and take care of your body, and work on anything that you need to work on, and just make sure to keep pushing your limits is what I would say. But that's everything from me today, guys. If you could, I'd love if you could leave a rating on Apple iTunes, and a comment as well. It goes a long way in helping to rank the podcast, and also goes a long way in letting me know what you like to hear more of. Outside of that, I would love if you could share this on your story, and subscribe on Spotify. But if you share it on your story as well, it goes a long way in promoting the podcast, and it's a huge help as well to me. So I would love if you could do that, guys. It really, really is. It goes a long way. But that's all from me today. Please send me what you your reviews, what you think of it. If there's any issues you have or anything you want to talk about, don't hesitate. Just get in contact with me on Instagram. What's the worst that can happen? I'll just say, work on this, focus on this, look at this. Okay, so don't worry about that at all. But yeah, that's everything from me today, guys. Hope everyone is doing well and having a good new year so far. And yeah, have a good one.